Hello and welcome to ETEnergyWorld. I'm Debapriya and today we are having a panel discussion on the energy industry's expectations from the budget. The panelists today are Mr. Rajiv Agrawal, Director, Federation of Indian Petroleum Industry, Mr. Rajiv Agrawal, Secretary, Indian Captive Power Producers Association, and Mr. Vinay Rustagi, MD, Bristol India. Welcome, sir. So I'll start with you. What are the major concerns regarding the oil and gas industry in front of the government right now?
Well, if I have to say the major concern, the biggest demand or the biggest expectation that the oil industry has from the government is inclusion of petroleum products into GST.
I think that's for all of the energy sector, right?
Yeah. Maybe yes, but for petroleum, yes, you asked me for petroleum. Yes, for petroleum, that's the major concern. And why I say so is because in the constitutional amendment that we had last year, although petroleum products are in GST, but the timing thereof has to be decided by the GST Council, which would happen 2, 3 to 5 years from now or whenever. Yeah. So our demand or concern there is that we should be in GST right from day one as soon as introduced. You know, GST is one of the maybe the biggest tax reform the country has ever had ever since independence, and it is going to benefit all sectors. So why should the petroleum sector be kept out of it? And the main concern there is because if you do not do it, then the petroleum sector would be stranded with taxes in their hands. Like your inputs would be under the GST. Let me explain you. Like you've got 5 products, crude oil, natural gas, MS, HSD, and ADF, which will be outside GST. But rest of them are under GST. So what will happen is when you procure any goods or services for these products, so then you would be under GST, but whatever the output that you produce, they are outside GST. So that will lead to locking off, your input credits. And according to one of the industry estimates, this figure is going to be something close to 25,000 crores. That's the number that the industry would be saddled with in case you are kept out of GST. So we have suggested that, of course, we should be brought under the GST regime right from day one. And in case there are some compulsions that the government can't do it, then we also suggested that probably you have to think of some mechanism by which this input tax credit, which gets locked, is available to the industry. We made some suggestions there. I can share that with you. And one is that probably you could bring them at maybe the lowest band rate of, let's say, 5%, with an added tier of, VAT and excise duty at a lower rate. You will have to recalibrate your VAT and excise duty rates so that the end prices do not go up. So that's one way. So that's perfectly possible under the current GST regime. People can do it, provided the states are agreeable to do it. Another option that we also suggested was that maybe you could zero rate them, so that you do qualify for the input tax credits. So that was one, I think GST is one big concern that the oil industry is currently facing, and we have made a pitch for that it should be made included in the GST right from the beginning.
Great. So I'll come back to you. Talking to Mr. Agrawal now, GST is one of the major concerns in the power and coal industry also.
Exactly.
So what are your thoughts on that?
See, if we say power and energy is the basic for survival of industry and as well as a general man. Now, unfortunately, somewhere as Mr. Bahl is also saying, that the government wants to earn a lot from the energy. Whereas, on the contrary, every country is supposed to keep the energy cost at the lowest level. Now, when it is happening the opposite direction, so naturally, the global competitiveness is taking a beating, naturally, and simultaneously, there are skews which is happening within the economy. Now, if I give you an example of coal, at G10 grade of coal, India, what government is charging is more than 100% tax. Now, it doesn't happen anywhere in the world. Now, out of this, 50% was levied as a cess, 400 rupees cess on coal last year. Now, what we expect the budget, that there should be a holistic approach for the country as a whole. Now, it also has a bearing on the losses of discoms. Today, suppose if we say 30% loss, 35% losses are there because of what is termed as T&D losses.
Yeah.
Now, if we are able to reduce coal cost by 50%, if we say, assume that government is not going to charge any tax, hypothetically, naturally, the whole power cost will come down by another 40%. So, in place of 35% losses, it will be hardly 20% losses. And the government will have to compensate only for that. And discoms have to manage only that 20% loss. Now, the government is taking from one hand and it's giving is back to states in another hand. And in the process, probably common man is also a big casualty. So what I feel that the government should take a holistic view on the energy sector, that apart from GST, and as I understand, coal is going to be under 28% bracket with provision of cess. Now, 28% bracket was kept for sin goods and luxury goods. That's tobacco. So that's my question. That whether coal energy is sin for the nation or it's a luxury for the nation.
Okay. Mr. Rustagi, coming back to you, renewable has been the talk this year. The government has talked a lot about renewable, a lot of capacity has been added. Now what the industry wants more from the government?
See, you're right. So I think this renewables has been at the forefront of this government. They've announced a lot of policy and financial incentives for the sector. Huge capacity has come up and is expected to come up in the next few years. I think the problem is now shifting. Problem is no longer about capacity creation. Problem is first demand, creating demand for power. What we have seen is that in the last 5 years, India's added a huge amount of new power capacity, but the demand has not kept pace, because of which the discoms have been reluctant to buy that power. And there is an increasing incidence of grid curtailment. So the first demand from the renewable sector and from the wider power sector is to support measures to create more demand in the industry, in the economy, whether it is through energy access programs across the country or whether it is through boosting the Make in India campaigns and so on. So that is point number one. The second is, I would say, enhancing the transmission grid, because investments in the transmission grid have not kept pace with the increases in the generation side. And again, that results in power not being able to be dispatched or evacuated, again making losses for the power generators. So those two, I would say, are the key measures. In addition to that, there can be other things that can be done to reform the power sector. For example, liberalizing the open access regime, which means as a private power producer, you can generate power anywhere in the country and sell to any customer, private or public, across the country. So I would say those 2 or 3 are the key policy support mechanisms that the sector needs in the coming years.
Okay, great.
Can I just put a few words in what he's saying? Renewable sector is expecting that they are able to sell more and more power to industry. Now, a big mechanism is through group captive power mechanism. Whereas in what Power Ministry is proposing in the amendment in the rules, that means that you will virtually not be able to sell anything out of the group captive. And the reason, as we understand, is that a lot of discoms are feeling that giving open access and access to group captive power takes away their customers, who are the highest paying customers.
Okay.
So that's a big disconnect with reference to even the Electricity Act 2003, which wants there should be an open competition and fair competition.
Mr. Rustagi, any thoughts on that?
So that is right. I mean, I think the discoms are naturally reluctant to allow more competition into their turf. Financially, they have been in a very weak condition, and if they have these high-paying customers walk away, then their condition will be further weakened. So the challenge for the government and the regulators is to balance the needs of the distribution companies as well as to reform the power sector in totality. Now, Uday has obviously made tremendous strides since being announced last year, but we still haven't seen the results of that come through. We expect by the end of this year, most of the debt of the distribution companies should have been passed over to the state governments and the balance sheet should be much stronger. Having said that, I think this is a 2 or 3 year process where the distribution companies can be sufficiently strengthened, and they have the confidence that it doesn't really matter which customers come in or walk out. They can withstand competition from the private generators, and they can still manage to run their business in a sustainable manner.
Okay. Mr. Bahl, now coming back to you. Any other proposal other than GST that you would have made to the government?
Yeah, actually, it's like it's basically twofold. One, that we look forward to some major announcements in the budget which go on to promote investments in this area, because the Prime Minister has this vision of 10% reduction in imports by 2022. So for that, you do need investments. And from where those investments are going to come, investments are actually drying, particularly in the private sector. I mean, if you look at the FDI, the numbers are dismal. Last year, we had FDI was just about $100 million, which is nothing as compared to the investments that are required in this area.
How much is the investment required right now?
Oh, it's phenomenal. I mean, if you see let's say, talk about E&P sectors, or maybe the companies have the massive plans, it'll run into billions of dollars.
Okay.
So if you require funds, if you require money, then you have to create an environment which is conducive for investors to come and put money here. And secondly, you have to look at ease of doing business here. We look forward to, fiscal stability. There should not be any disputes between the government or under the typically production sharing contracts between the government or maybe the partners, which actually takes away the whole the purpose for which the JV has been formed. So what we expect from the government is that some announcements which promote investments into this area.
Okay.
So is the case for refineries. Like we have world-class, refineries in India, both in public sector as well as the private sector, which are both in terms of capacity as well as the complexities. They are anywhere they can beat any refineries. Now, for these refineries to compete, we look forward to some kind of tariff protection for them to sustain their businesses. And because they do have a threat from the similar refineries which have come up in the Middle East. So we expect some kind of tariff protection from the government in this budget, if it's not so.
Okay.
And of course, since these companies have massive plans for investments, there should be adequate incentives for them to, like as we hear, that all the tax breaks or tax holidays are eventually going away. So the government will have to think of devising some new incentives for people to come and make investments. Some new tax breaks will have to be devised. So that's the only way you can achieve this goal of 10% reduction in imports.
But if you had to list the top 3 concerns in the industry right now, what would those be?
Let's say I did talk of maybe the ease of doing business.
Yes.
Now, when you invest money here, so you expect the fiscal stability in your entire regime. In between, I mean, you cannot change the rules of the game when the match has already begun. Like our last year, if I recall, there was a circular issued by Ministry of Finance on 13th of April on service tax, on royalties. Now, our oil producers are constantly living under the fear that royalty will be taxed maybe as a service tax, Now, if that were to happen, like nowhere in the world, royalty is, you pay tax on royalty. If that were to happen, then probably it will shy away all the investments. People will not come forward to invest. And how will you achieve the government's, vision of, reducing 10% imports,
Okay.
So you have to remove all the impediments, what are there, create an environment which is conducive for investments. So that was one, that you said you remove all the impediments, and similarly, like for example, you have on the refining again, that you have to. I did mention that you have to create some more incentive schemes for people to come forward and invest. Typically, these days we have like when the retailers, you say there's a branded fuel and unbranded fuel, there's a different excise duty on that. Now, we don't see why the reason there should be any difference between the branded fuel and the novel fuel. Rather, conceptually, branded fuels, they're called branded, but they were introduced to protect the environment. They're the greener fuels. So the excise duty, in fact, should be lower on them rather than being on higher.
Of course, considering the government's...
governments, so that's again one of our recommendations to the government, and we expect, that disparity between the branded fuel and, the novel fuel should go away in terms of excise duty.
Okay. Mr. Agrawal, would you be looking at, have you already proposed the government about rolling back of the coal cess?
Yeah, we have already written to them, and as I've already said, it's an overall perspective of what the government wants to earn. And there is no link between 400 rupees environment cess and a commitment that this money will go to environment. So there is a big disconnect as far as, and it is purely a fiscal activity and exercise, nothing to do with any industry. I also try to link it with the Coal India disinvestment, where the government was probably trying to earn some money, which was not happening, and maybe they have already earned much higher than that within a year out of this 400 rupees cess.
Okay.
And as
the government has already earned so much from the auctions.
Again, it's a big disconnect. Nowhere in the world natural resources are auctioned. See, what is the need of having natural resources? Then you can buy it at the international market dollar price, not purchase price parity. So there is no need of having natural resources. You can always import it at the international market price. That's what is the government is trying to say in terms of coal also. So there is a big disconnect, and as Mr. Bahl was saying, ease of doing business is another important area which is taking a big hit. Now, as I was mentioning about amendments proposed in the electricity rule, that lot of provisions are going in contradiction to Electricity Act itself. They are trying to redefine the Companies Act through a rule. Now, it's something laughable, but they can do it. I give you another example of Mines Ministry proposing District Mineral Fund. Now, that DMF they wanted to collect from a back date, August 15.
Yeah.
There is another notification now wherein they want to earn it from January 15. So at one end we are saying no retrospective taxes, and government is doing it, and then they want to do it further. So these are the things which definitely investors are looking at. Another aspect is when it is said that India is power surplus today. So there is a reluctance on the part of people to invest, and already because of the coal mass in the IPP sector, the investment, and a lot of bad debts which have been created, the whole sector is in a big mess. So there has to be a rational thinking, a holistic thinking, where each and every ministry is on the same footing, and it's not that electricity, say for a captive user, there is a RPO, renewable power obligation.
Yeah.
There is a PAT, where you have to save 5% of energy over a period of 3 years. Then you have to take care of environment by putting up equipments to reduce your emissions, and over and above you have to pay 400 rupees tax to maintain the environment. Now there's a big disconnect.
Could you give us a sense of how has the tax, the 400 rupee tax, impacted the sector in this 1 year?
See, घर में अगर एक डेथ हो जाती है, उसके बाद भी लाइफ चलती रहती है. It is something like that. Life doesn't stop because people say कि क्या कहीं कोई बंद हुआ है? Of course not, but yes, definitely global competitiveness is taking a big hit.
Okay, okay. Mr. Rustagi, the government has been talking about RPOs, but there has been reports that DISCOMs are switching off renewable power now and then, and they are not buying power. So your thoughts on that? Do you think government should come up with more stringent laws regarding RPOs in the budget? Or
yeah, sure. Okay. So the problem about the RPO and the DISCOMs not buying enough renewable power arises from the fact that power is a concurrent subject. It is ultimately up to the state regulators to enforce the RPOs and to penalize the DISCOMs or the other customers as and when they don't honor their obligations. Now, DISCOMs have been in a very poor financial state. So the regulators have actually been sympathetic to them and given them enough leniency so that they don't have to suffer more penalties, because if they penalize them more, ultimately the DISCOMs will pass on the financial burden to the customers and the tariffs will go up. So it is actually a chicken and an egg story. I mean, ultimately what needs to be done is through the operational reforms, through reduction in T&D losses, through regular increases in tariffs, if the DISCOMs are made financially strong enough, only then can you expect to enforce RPOs on them and to start levying penalties if they fail to meet those obligations. So, as I said, we do expect the effects of the Uday scheme to start coming through from this year onwards. Renewable power now also has become much cheaper over the last 2 years. The cost has come down from about 7 to 8 rupees about 3 years ago to about 4 to 4.5 rupees today. So the DISCOMs actually don't need any incentive now to buy more renewable power. What they need is, one, they need power demand. Second, what they need is they need transmission capacity so that this power from the renewable power sources can be fed through to the customers. So I think from the sector's perspective, the biggest need of the hour, particularly looking at this budget, is if the government can provide more funding, more impetus to the transmission sector, so that there is a
green corridors.
That's right, green corridors, smart grids, storage systems, etc., so that there is a matching of capacity at the generation level, transmission level, and the distribution level.
Okay. Talking about wind, the GBI is about to expire. So do you think the government will renew it this time?
Yeah, so if you look at how both the wind and the solar sector have evolved, we have the sector has matured very well in the last 3 years. Yeah. We used to generate about 4 to 5 gigawatt per annum. That was the capacity addition about 3 years ago, and this year it will be about 12 gigawatts. Yeah. So the business volumes have increased substantially, cost curves have come down, and increasingly the view is that renewables has achieved grid cost parity and doesn't need any more support like in the past. And I believe the government definitely strongly believes in that, and my sense is that as we go along, most of these incentives and SOPs will be phased out over a period of time. So that, I'm afraid, includes the GBI for the wind sector. It possibly also includes the phasing out of the 10-year tax holiday, which is also valid only until March 17. Yeah. So I expect that these incentives like these will be phased out in the next 1 or 2 years.
Mr. Bahl, I think
we talked about cess, a while ago. No, cess is something, which once introduced by the government, probably it's permanent, it never goes away. We have so many examples of so many cesses which the government has been levying from years. One such set was NCCD, there was a calamity cess levied by the government sometime way back in the 90s, late 90s or something, still carrying on. It's a very small cess, maybe 50 rupees on every ton of crude that you process. Another cess is the OID cess, Oil Industry Development Cess, which the government collects from the oil producers. Not from all the oil producers, but they select those in the pre-NLP regime. Now, this cess was about 4,500 per ton of crude. Last year, it was changed to 20% ad valorem. Of course, we had requested government to de-link with, don't make it 4,500 is it is hitting the industry very badly, So they reduced to 20% ad valorem. What we had suggested was they say it should be about 8%. So our demand to the government, once again, is to, reduce the cess, OID cess from 20% ad valorem to something like close to 8%. Because oil prices, when we were talked of 20% ad valorem was $100 a barrel. Then it came down to $30s or $28. It was working fine. But when you see the oil prices again inching upwards, so you need to redress, come and revisit this cess once again. This is one of the suggestions that we also made to the government.
Yeah, I was about to come to that. The OPEC decision of cutting production, how do you think it will affect the Indian oil and gas sector going ahead?
Well, I mean, it's a kind of thing which it'll benefit some and may not benefit others.
Okay.
In the sense that those who are the producers on the upstream, it's a good news for them. The oil prices going up is good for them. But not so good maybe for those who refine.
Okay.
To the refiners, in the sense that again, if you go back to of course we don't see oil going back to the 100 levels, but any incremental price of the oil, you pay more for your imports. Your working capital gets locked in, so you get into those kind of problems, and government will have to get into those subsidy schemes and all those things, which are unfortunately we come out of it now. There are no subsidies. Diesel has been deregulated fully, so we don't want to go back to the old era once again.
Okay. The tax incentive that Mr. Rustagi talked about, it is applicable to the oil and gas sector also.
As I mentioned, the tax incentive, the government's thinking and the sense that we get is with the reduction in the corporate tax rates, which are to be brought down gradually. The government is thinking of taking away all the tax benefits, tax incentives or tax holidays, ETEnergyWorld benefits. So they will always eventually, or the sunset clauses will not be extended anymore. So, but there again lies, if you want more investments, you want people to come forward and invest, then you have to think of some other ways, some other means to incentivize, your structure, or you reduce the tax rates so much that you don't feel the pinch of paying the tax.
Okay. What kind of growth do you see for the sector going ahead in the next financial year?
Growth a lot depends upon what kind of again, I am coming back to investments again and again. If you see the oil production in the country is about 37 million tons, almost static. It's not growing at all. So we want it to grow up. And the only way we can grow up is that we make more investment, make more conducive investments, environment rather, ease of doing business, so that people come forward and invest.
Okay.
Yeah, to give you a number, the investments in the E&P sector in last year was just about 2,000 crores in the private sector.
Okay.
As against 2008-9, where it was more in excess of 20,000 crores.
Oh.
So bulk of the investments which is coming in the E&P is coming from the government sector. So in the private sector is shying away. They're not putting more money into it. So if you want that to come, you have to first of all address their concerns. If something is hurting them, if the production sharing contracts are running into problem, you must address them. You cannot, of course, help was the new exploration policy announced by the government, which is a very welcome step. We should move forward. And India has a very large coastline of maybe 3.14 million square kilometers of where oil is there, sedimentary basins, and only 19% of them has been still explored. So
what are the major roadblocks?
Roadblocks are because first of all there are no realistic estimates of how much the oil is there. So in case anybody wants, one way is that people do a lot of exploration, so that automatically you come to know that these are the these are the 4 discoveries could be there. Or you should have a very strong database. And under the open acreage licensing policy, which the government wants to move forward, there is the concept of NDR, National Depository, NDR is there. So there, of course, a constant database would be maintained. That should be given more fill-up so that people can make their own calculated judgment on how much oil is there, and before putting in their bid in the auction.
Okay.
So that is something I think the government must concentrate on. Give a realistic database so that realistic assessments can be made.
Mr. Agrawal, your thoughts about this growth in the sector going ahead?
See, growth today is dependent on industrial production and access of power to the poorest of poor. Now, with the transmission lines and the constraints to reach the last mile, naturally renewable is an option for that. And of course, there has to be a sense that more and more people are allowed to produce power in place of depending on DISCOMs.
But does the country have enough demand to absorb all that power?
See, once we talk of industry, the high energy consuming industries are the ones which convert natural raw materials to the goods which are usable directly or in the next processes, like cement, like aluminum, like steel, like textile, like paper. Now, these are all industries which are high energy consumption. And unless there is a sense of energy cost reduction, which is directly linked, one thing is to the taxes, and another thing is the legacy of Coal India having 52% manpower cost as a production cost against, say, 25 to 30% globally, and large amount which is put up as a losses and pilferage. So unless these things are taken care of at the grassroots, and the government really thinks holistically about taxing energy, the growth is going to be sometimes yes, sometimes no. That's what we feel. Okay. So it's going to be a mixed bag only.
Okay. Mr. Rustagi, do you think the government is on its way, it will meet the target of 175 gigawatts by 2022?
So the 175 gigawatt target, I think, is very, very ambitious. There is actually a huge surge in the sector volumes. To give you some numbers, this year the country is going to add in 16-17 about 7 gigawatts of total renewable capacity. But the next year, we expect total capacity addition to go up to 12 and possibly 13 gigawatts. So there is actually a huge increase in capacity addition, but that is still way below the government's target. The government target for next year, 17-18, is about 18 gigawatts. So it is about 35% below the government's targets. Now, why is there such a gap despite all the government support? The gap is because of the general overall market environment, overall market and policy environment. The ability of the DISCOMs to buy and sell that power to the customers, the ability of the transmission grid to actually support that kind of capacity generation, and eventually the capacity of the distribution grid and the customers to buy that power. So there are a lot of factors which will go into boosting the demand from now, from where we are today, to actually close to where the government wants those numbers to be.
Okay. Great. So I think we have got a sense of what the energy industry wants from the government, this budget. And
there was one more point which probably I would like to mention. Sure. Is like the government is giving a lot of focus, a lot of impetus on gas being a cleaner fuel. And it should be right. Actually, the current percentage of gas in the energy basket is just about 6.5%. And we want it to grow up. And we want that the government should take some positive steps in that direction. Some major announcements should come there. For example, you could maybe make the LNG imports duty nil, which is, if other than power, our power is already nil. If it is other than power, LNG imports should be at a nil customs duty rate so that you get LNG at a cheaper rate. So these kind of things, that will go a long way in promoting the gas in India, and that's the gas vision that the government of India looks at, promoting gas share to maybe double it to 15%, in the years to come.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debapriya.
Thank you. Wonderful. Yeah.